Good afternoon and welcome to this parallel event hosted by the Associated Country Women of the World. My name is Magdi de Kok and I am the World President of ACWW, and I am delighted to be introducing our panel of speakers and moderating today's discussions. This session of the Commission on the Status of Women is unlike any we have seen before, and it is an honor to be participating in this online parallel event and to have an audience more diverse and reflective of our global representation than is normally possible in such sessions. So we are more able to focus on constructive dialogue. We have prepared an accompanying PDF booklet, which you can download from the files table for this event, which included biographies of each of the speakers and an overview of the topic and ACWW's work. You will also be able to find some poll questions we have set on the event page, and we would appreciate you posting any questions you have in the chat so they can be addressed later in the meeting. I would now like to extend our sincerest thanks to Jill Naylor, Ambassador Wesseling, Irene Chinjay, and Marie Kenny for joining us today. The challenges of a global citizenship are perhaps more evident in 2021 than at any point in the decades since the end of the Cold War. The rise of popularism, national agendas promoting isolationism, and regressive stances on women's rights present international obstacles to cooperative development. Continued regional and national conflicts all raise the temperature and are exacerbated by proxy wars in Syria, Sudan, and other failed or failing states. Countries in the global north produce the vast majority of the world's weapons systems and spend endless millions on the development and deployment of remotely piloted drones while claiming poverty when considering the need for social protection systems. This imbalance is even more evident when one considers that the majority of the world's active conflict zones sit in the global south. Every bullet fired, every bomb dropped, every drone, every missile launched is a profit line on the budget of an already rich country, with a cost paid in the blood and the bodies of those not born into the safety and stability of the most developed nations. I trained as a teacher and had the good fortune to work as a school principal and to live in a rural community. I passionately believe that we have opportunities forged in the flames of the COVID-19 pandemic to see real change for the better. The voices of rural women in small communities around the world need to be heard and recognized for their experience. These communities are aging, and the youth increasingly migrating to urban areas and turning their backs on agriculture, owing to the lack of incentives and the difficulties of rural life. Our rural youth must have realistic opportunities for self-development, for education, for participation in national and indeed international decision-making. For our rural communities the past year, and indeed the 92 years since ACWW was founded, has been a constant struggle, and yet we are expected to carry on and feed the world. This is exactly what we have done, and I am proud today to bring forward the voices of rural women on this panel, and that ACWW is facilitating this opportunity for international discussion. SDG 4.7 says, we must ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including education for almost other things, human rights, gender equality, promotion of peace and non-violence, and global citizenship. In 1953, ACWW's members passed a resolution which said that world government depends upon good and informed citizenry in the community, the state, the nation, and intentionally, and that women must assume their responsibilities as informed and active citizens of the world. We have been working towards this ever since and have been advocating for rural women's full participation in all elections, education programs, leadership and citizen training, and indeed standing for and holding elected office. In 2019, ACWW joined the steering committee for UNESCO's NGO Forum on Global Citizenship and, at the end of 2020, was elected to the UNESCO NGO Liaison Committee, where we remain committed to achieving these goals and helping elevate and represent all civil society organizations who hold status with UNESCO. Peace is not passive. Peace is an active effort to listen, to understand, and to collaborate. Peace is the goal and global citizenship is the pathway. The advent of 24-hour news, lightning fast global communication through social media, and the significant efforts of more progressive state parties give us opportunities to make a real change. The COVID-19 pandemic has undoubtedly shown us all how important it is that we stand together and elevate our collective humanity over the unilateral priorities of political parties and national governments. The COVAX initiative has shown just how quickly we can take collective action for the global good when presented with utter devastation as the only alternative. If we can harness this positivity and energy to focus on education, on the elevation of the world's marginalized peoples, on the recognition of rural women as not only equal citizens of our world, but as critical for our food systems and climate disaster mitigation, then truly we can see global citizenship as the path to peace and to building back better. I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Irene Chinje from Cameroon. Irene is the founder of the Women's Empowerment Enterprise Network, a Cameroon-based non-profit she founded in 2000, focused on building a community of women for women who are passionate about gender issues, women's rights and empowerment, to unite, to build and nurture relationships, get support, develop communities, and grow personally and professionally through education. She is also ACWW's area president for East, West, and Central Africa, a role in which she has served since first elected in 2016. Ms. Chinje, you have the floor to address us on the local challenges that block global citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you, Magdi. I greet everybody on the panel and on the board. I'm going to focus on the rural community of Cameroon, and I'll focus more on a small region found in the northwest of Cameroon, presently in crisis, and it is called Santa. It's one of the 5 subdivisions that make up Mezam, with headquarters of the division. Santa comprises of 10 villages and the gateway into the Northwest region. 80% of its economy and 80% of its economy is agriculture, with a new breed of livestock in this sector. Within this community, you see the role of the rural woman as the breadwinner and custodian of the family, though not the family head. The rural woman, hardworking, taking care of the home and community, she ensures the total well-being of her family within the additional responsibility of supporting her husband in his own activities. She's the pillar of the family in nurturing, improving the standards and welfare of the home, as well as contribute to the development of the community. Unfortunately, her contributions do not figure in the growth and development of the nation, which is important for equality. The rural woman has her normal chores with the addition of the children's education, not only as the first teacher, but contributing much to ensure the children receive education, most often with the fees, books, and other school needs. She gives the children life values. We have an insult when meted on your child is detrimental to the family. If your child is insulted, lack of home training. This is indicative of the mother's failure in bringing up the child and giving no values to them. This is why the role of the woman as first teacher is of great importance in any family. A typical day of the rural woman starts at 4 a.m. And you can't say exactly when she retires. With the farm as her main occupation, she must get things all done before leaving at 5 a.m. to distant farmland so as to start work early enough before the sun gets hot. The girl child in the village was the mother's helpmate as a babysitter and a partner to go to the farm. And working on the farm with the value of educating the girl child now, the woman found themselves into the society group to help each other. Most often, the younger children are left within the care of grandparents. They are the life wire of food sustainability. The main occupation of the rural woman is agriculture for food production, sustainability, and income generation for the welfare of the family. Her role here stands as the breadbasket as she shoulders everything in food sustainability. They are the main labor force and are so organized in their activities using their social group network to reduce stress and strain. The hours spent on these farms can't really be accounted for, given that they still use rudimentary tools on hard terrain, not always fertile. They produce a wide variety of food, of which the excess is sold to improve on the family economy. They lack the basic skills and better farming techniques. It is still that we will be taking a lot of food spoilage and wastage on the farms, resulting from the lack of transportation and accessibility, as well as challenges of marketing. Despite this hard work and great contributions of food sustainability to the nation, they are still among the poorest of the poor. This comes from the unorganized market, where the middlemen still come to take the food at a giveaway price to the urban areas, where they now make lots of profits. Another great challenge is the land ownership, as the husband needs to sell the land. Most often, they would never consult, and most often, the fertile land is fast to be sold. Women too have gradually gotten into the livestock production purely for economic gains, and a lot of them keep pigs, goats, and poultry. From this, they use the droppings to enrich their farms. Another big challenge the women now face is this climate change. With lack of climate information services, they encounter a lot of loss. They start when the first rains come, which is indicative. They go and plant their crops, and you realize that when a drought comes, what has sprouted is now wasted away because they have to redo planting. So you see, they have to go on buying seeds again to go and replant, which is a big challenge, which to date, we have not been able to find a way forward to help the women get proper information on when they can start planting. With the increase of the economic hardship, many women within the rural communities take paid jobs out of the home, but they get paid workers now to do the farming, but their afternoons after work, holidays, and weekends takes them back to their farms. A lot of those not literate or lacking opportunities for a paid job flood the informal sector, mostly as the famous buy-am sell-ams, which helps them get better products out of the farm. Others are into petty trading, hairdressing, dressmaking, foodstuff retails, as well as small restaurations, selling cooked food, which they carry around on their heads. With this, the women are able to build some financial stability to cater for their financial needs, as well as helping them build capital and credit for the business ventures. Within the community, most local councils raise their revenue through taxing these women without providing adequate structures to help them sell better or to help them carry out their businesses better. During the rains, you realize you see these women inside the rains covering umbrellas by the roadsides because they don't have a proper place a decent place, let me say so, where they can go display their foods. And the hygienic conditions of these foods is poor because the food is sometimes displayed on the ground. So you see vegetables being put on mats on the floor and people come and buy, which is not hygienic enough and which does not help build them or improve the quality of life. You find these women by the roadsides under the scorching sun trying to sell. They lack the capital and financial assistance. And this made the women to create their own small initiative groups where they carry out small savings and loan schemes to support members. This technique, and it's been a great innovation, within the rural community has brought some women to own accounts and gain independence. We give credit to some of the micro schemes within the country that have gone to these rural communities and are able to open up rural community banks where these women can now come to take loans, and they can use as collateral for their loans their pots, their, whatever they have at home, or as the group members can stand as guarantors to help them get loan. So that's a good initiative that some micro-rural community banks have been able to set up, which I think is helping the rural community. And the women can proudly say they now own bank accounts, because with this, they can use it to do other things. Because initially, they just had their Njangi groups. And in that Njangi groups, they don't have any access to public funds or anything. But with this now, they can do something. Women are the custodians of culture, and as first teachers to their children, impact the culture and builds up the moral values. Children who behave poorly are quickly identified, and their poor upbringing is attributed to their family or home from which they come. With lots of migration now, there are cultural groups created to ensure continuity of their culture for the young ones, as well as assist development projects back in their different communities. They do lots of fundraising and other activities which promote the culture and serve as a way of empowering their youths. Most of their activities help develop themselves, their families, and communities through self-help initiatives. The women here take their own decisions. Women organize cultural evenings where they do a lot of their cultural food, and this helps the young ones who have left their homes and are migrated to other places to still understand and follow up what food stuff, what traditional dances, and any other thing that is within the culture. Even though they are out, they are integrated through these activities that the women organize. And the women usually, they organize themselves because the men don't need to be consulted. So this is one of the positions in which you can see, because of the development and because of their role as mothers, as teachers, as custodians of the culture, they do that without the initiative of the men. And the men normally come to support them financially by buying the foods or by giving them some tips on the activities that have been carried out. Decision-making within the community does not include the woman, even within families or projects that befits them. Hardly will you find women within the traditional council. They are gradually improving, but at too slow a pace. The laws in place are not really friendly, nor quite explicit, so all depends on those it favors. Talking about this cultural inhibition for women, the traditional council does not recognize women. So, and these women contribute a lot, as we've heard, to the community. They do a lot of projects, raise funds for these development projects, and yet they are not brought into the forefront to even assist with their own ideas. The men take the decisions and they just bring the women in to just be actors. Just be actors, because the women are hardworking, they can provide, they can negotiate, they can bring in more people, they can bring their friends and other women groups to come and sustain the project they are carrying. That is when women came in. But in bringing women, when the project is being conceived, it is a far-fetched issue for our community here, for the rural community especially. You might find it different in the urban communities, but in the rural communities, it still remains a real taboo to bring women to the forefront on a discussion where men are sitting. It still has those cultures that we need to break, or we need to change, or we need to improve, or we need to get people educated. Those educated men who are out of the community should now be able to come back and help to sensitize and get those people who are deeply rooted in the culture to begin to understand the role of the rural woman, the place the woman plays in the development. Because development, even building a house back in the village, the women organize themselves, they mold the blocks, and they get their friends to come and contribute when they are building. So we see the important role of these women, that in decision making, they need to be consulted and they need to be brought together. The state is very present within the rural community, but their impact is mostly for political gains. Most of their institutions or structures work in close collaboration with the government, and we realize lack of independence does not really contribute much to the development of most areas. Solely, they rely mainly on cultural groups when they are building up or doing any development projects. But you realize the government does not recognize these women when it comes. It makes the men. The women are only used for their political gains, like they want some political success, or they're coming for some campaign, or they are coming for something that they want the government to pass through. They use the women. But to recognize the role of these women in this aspect of their development, it is still far-fetched. So those are some of the issues which the rural woman is still facing. The woman within the urban area, we know, is like educated. Even those who are not educated, they've gotten so involved in the politics of the place that they now talk out. But those rural women, they only come back to them when they need their votes, which is a very sad story for our rural community. And we can see that the votes or the elections normally are not really what it should be, because without the representation or the voice of these women, what do you think they can come out with? So they can't even talk, because the men are those who will talk for them. You go within local councils, you hardly find the women. Even the women within the local councils, they are just so passive, or they are just receptive. They are not outspoken. Their voices is very minimal. Those who can even be vocal might be those who are educated and are working within the rural community, who have come to join the councils, that they can now stand out for this. But the typical rural woman, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah.
So the state, with that, we think that the state has a lot to do, because with agriculture, even, which is the main thing, they have to do a lot, even though they have done something, because they give some fundings and then they organize agri shows. But the agri shows, when they organize the agri show and they bring in the food products, what do they give to these women? They give them wheelbarrows, they give them cutlasses, they give them hoes, still taking them back to the hard work of the farm. So it's a bit difficult. And
yeah. Thank you, Irene. Thank you very much, Irene, for not only sharing your personal experience on the subject, but also giving us a glimpse of the situation in your part of the world and the local challenges facing rural women in the block, how they block the global citizenship. Clearly, rural communities are facing many challenges on many fronts, and yet you are hopeful and working diligently to make the best of your circumstances, and we applaud you for that. Later in the session, Irene, you will have the opportunity to address the questions posted to you, and thank you for that in advance.
Thank you, Magdi.
We are pleased to welcome His Excellency Hans Besseling, the permanent representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to UNESCO. He was Deputy Director for Peace Building and Stabilization in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and served as Civil Advisor to the Dutch Permanent Representation to NATO, and then as Consul General for the Netherlands in St. Petersburg, Russia. An Eastern European specialist, He returned to his favorite region in the position as Consul General in St. Petersburg. He speaks fluent Russian, which helps him to achieve his main goal, fostering the cooperation between Russian and Dutch people. He has been the permanent representative at UNESCO since 2018. Mr. Wesseling likes to work with young, innovative organizations in the field of culture and civil society. At UNESCO, he intends to further engage in culture and education as important elements of relations between countries. Ambassador Wesseling, please share with us the international view and on-the-ground challenges.
Thank you very much, Magda. And having carefully listened to Irene, it's quite a challenge to follow up on her. Thank you also, Nick, for having invited me, because when you asked me to say a few words for this important panel, I suddenly realized that actually when I started working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 40 years ago, within my first few months, I was already involved in a huge event, a day-long event where we were not allowed to work, but really had to address women issues 40 years ago. That all came back when a few months ago, when I started thinking about what actually I could share with you and share with you with pleasure. Just one small sideline. I've been watching at the chat, and it's much my pleasure that I see that a certain Svetlana, Oksana, and Natalia are participating. They come from a part of the world which is incredibly dear to me. I've been working in Kiev from 1992 to 1996. And there too, I saw that those people who accept the most formidable challenges are actually the women. But I'll come back to that when I give you part of my story. We've made some progress in the Netherlands in those 40 years. Let me be a little bit. Let me show a little bit of pride. Not much, but a little bit. We have 140 embassies and consulates abroad, and of 32 of them, we have women as ambassadors. Now you can think it's a lot, or you can think it's not enough. For myself, when I saw those numbers, I'm a little bit disappointed. I see how long ACWW has been working on these women and gender issues. I think that in the Netherlands, in 40 years, actually half of the ambassadors should have been women, actually. So I say it with only very little pride that some women have reached the top, but many more are still to come, and I really hope so. It makes a difference, a big difference, and a positive difference. For more content-wise, my intervention, I draw on the artistic study of a young woman named Ksenia Diadorova from St. Petersburg, and she's director of Gonzo Design, a social design bureau. She's carried out a survey on the dialogue between parents and daughters in rural areas. And then she puts the life and the growing up of young girls, young women in the setting of seasons, in the setting of agriculture, in the setting of the rural background. The reason that Ms. Diadorova decided to do this project is because she wanted to research in depth the cultural environment in which girls grow up, and see if we can learn from that, if we really want, as ACWW puts it, make this journey to true equality. And I was interested in that, and we financed part of that project. Why is it important for us also as Western Europeans? Why? Because in many ways, Europeans do not differ that much. So, and then I'm talking about people from Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, but that paradoxically makes it often to relate with people in Russia, and maybe even also in Ukraine, because we never realize how tough it is, certainly in Russia, but I think also in Ukraine, and maybe even in the Asian countries there, to grow up and become 18. When you don't live in Petersburg, in Moscow, or in Kiev, or Lvov, or Odessa, it's a very harsh life to become 18 and to still be relatively normal. That is something we have never realized in the West, where we are, I think, certainly compared to rural life in Russia, incredibly spoiled. A simple example is always the glasnost and perestroika period in Russia. In the West, we say, okay, a liberal capitalism has come, now everybody will be happy. What we have never realized, that very few people in Russia are very happy with it, and very, very many people belong to the lost generations, including the youngest, because education went down like mad. So life was tough for everybody rule, but even tougher for women rule. Often they married far too young to be able to move out of their parents' house. And also you had the problem, which still is there, alas, of domestic violence. So life, growing up is already difficult. Growing up is happening under pressure. Leaving your parents is also happening in pressure. And even your married life can be a tough one because of this terrifying domestic violence. Let me share a few quotes from this project with you. The project itself is called Earth Awakenings, and when you type in Gonzo Design and Earth Awakenings, you get their website and you get quite a clear overview of their total project. But then one conversation I think is quite it says quite a lot about how young women grow up. This is what a young woman thinks to herself, having talked by herself, having talked to her mother. My mother, I think I can clearly see where I want to go, and I have a good sense of myself, says the young girl. My mother says things to me like, you're a woman, you must be softer. You need to learn to be adaptable if you don't want to end up alone. A woman's primary happiness lies in giving birth to a child. And then the young girl said, and then an enormously strong resistance wells up in me, because I do not understand where these rules came from and who invented them. And my clarity is shaken. I don't know, she continues, what it is like to be a woman, because I do not know what it is like not to be one. I never felt like someone else, and being a woman is all I have. Well, that is a very short conversation, and many of these conversations are taking place because what Xenia does quite professionally actually is letting rural traditional parents talk with girls who are trying to get their mindset changed, and she shows under which pressure they are and how tough it is for them to get through this rural life and maybe even try to do something else in life and take a different course than the one they're pressurized in by their elders and by their peers. It's a worthwhile page to have a look at in the web. And let me be very frank and honest. Xenia Diodoro tells the story 100 times better than I do, but I just wanted to give you a taste of this. I have lived and worked a lot in Eastern Europe. I'm fascinated by that part of the world, and I'm fascinated for many reasons. And one of them is indeed the position of women and the way I really have regarded them as powerful players and pushers of change in that part of the world. I have really followed from close by the struggle of women to obtain their rightful position in society, the real, the honest, the gender struggle. Certainly in Eastern Europe, where women do play an essential role when it comes to transformation of society. And that was one of the things I experienced. Also in 1992, we opened the embassy in Kiev, and then we said, okay, we need local staff, but we would like local staff to speak English. We couldn't find a single man who could speak English. The only ones who spoke English and had clearly studied it in advance were the women, which means they saw change coming. They knew you could not survive in a modern world if you not at least could speak English and maybe other foreign languages. Well, the men thought, well, it's not going to happen that quick, and everybody who comes here speaks Russian anyway. Well, not true. And the women at that moment really fulfilled key positions and did that in a very much male-dominated society. Now I will, with pleasure, leave it to Svetlana, Oksana, and Natalia to tell me how society is these days. But I would want to say that one of the things that you can say in Eastern Europe, and then I talk about and Russia and Ukraine, is that there are fabulous role models. So that's there. I mean, for instance, you can really say, without exaggerating, that the women are fearless, courageous, and they are the force for change, if you really want change, if you really want to withstand the revisionism which many countries are falling back now, they take initiatives, for instance, for the mentally handicapped. In many of those countries, handicapped were put in the forest, away, out of sight, and just wished away. It's women that say, no, 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 no. We are inclusive. They are part of our society. They have to be seen. You can better get used to them. The same thing goes for LGBTI. If you look at LGBTI organizations, it's rarely the homosexuals that take the lead. It's the lesbians that do it, and homosexuals follow. It's the lesbians that are courageous. It's the lesbians that set up organizations. It's the lesbians that look abroad and say, can you come and help us? Can you at least support us? And a great deal of my work as a consul in St. Petersburg was indeed providing support. And what they liked, and that is an important thing that I'm trying to get across, is not that bit of money that we gave them. What they want is me to tell them that there are huge lesbian organizations in the Netherlands that will always support them, that will always be there, that will always be an anchor for the tough and dangerous but essential work that they do in Russia, for instance, where it is very dangerous to be lesbian or homosexual. That also goes for other issues, and a very important one is human rights. The best human rights stories are women. Why? Because they're tough. Why? Because they're fearless. Why? Because they will fight until the end, knowing their own system. Well, how can we, and now I'm drawing to the end because I'm trying to become practical now, is how can we do something? How can we indeed help them on the journey to true equality? Where maybe we might, but not really making enough headway. Of course, education plays an incredibly important role. Social media play a great role if you want to have the youth. The youth has stopped reading papers, has stopped listening to all formal media channels, and are only relying on their own channels. Those might be ways to reach them and to look at this new generation, which is full of talented and courageous people, and not least the girls. But there's one issue I'd like to ask special attention for, and it might not be very practical, but sometimes it seems to work, and that is the essential role of arts and culture. Of course, education and exchange are important, but let me give you one really quite a well-known example. I'm mentioning the pop group Pussy Riot. Now, I think practically everybody knows them, and they are a pop group that once disturbed a mass in the Christ Savior Cathedral in Moscow. I think the most holy place you have in Moscow. And they suddenly jumped in, grabbed their guitars and started singing. Of course, they were grabbed by the police, ushered out, and then punished severely, formally because of disturbance of the services. But actually, if you really think about what they did, in reality, it was because they challenged a totally male-dominated, religion-supported, corrupt system of government. That's why they were punished so hard. So far, the story of Pussy Riot. Then 2 or 3 years after that, when I was just starting in St. Petersburg, I'm watching my time, Magdi, and you can stop me when necessary. When I came to St. Petersburg, there was the Manifesta exhibition in the Hermitage Museum, one of the most famous museums in the world. Classical museum, but with a very courageous director, Piotrowski, who said, listen, my museum started as a modern art museum 250 years ago. I still like modern art. He did it. In one of the exhibition halls, there was a huge wall. And as you know, Pussy Riot wore balaclavas in very basic wool colors. On that wall were the 4 colors that Pussy Riot used, but they were not balaclavas. There were just 4 blankets in those colors. When you came in that room, the first thing you said, Pussy Riot. And it caused outrage, scandal, happiness, every possible emotion. And then you suddenly see the power of art in a very light way, without even mentioning them. It referred to these young and brave girls whose life is still being ruined, by the way, in Russia. But I think they are fabulous role models, showing that you can stand up to a society that is not really helping you to become a true member of society and of civil society. My final words, talking about art, I always have to quote Osip Mandelstam, a famous Russian poet. He says, being a poet is an important and dangerous job because you can get the death penalty for it. Unhappily so, it really happened to Osip. He lost his life because of his fabulous poems, which are still recited by heart in Russia, maybe also in Kiev, I don't know, but certainly in Russia. I join you, Magdi, in saying that we are going through tough and dangerous times, but then it's all the more important that we realize when we talk about gender equality that we are at a tipping point, not only for climate crisis, not only because of the decreasing democratic space, but also for gender equality. And we need to show courage, compassion, and creativity to help these young women in the rural environment and bring them into the global citizenship realm. Thank you very much, Maggie.
Well, it was fascinating listening to you, and I thank you kindly, Ambassador Wessling, for your valuable and insightful contribution. So you provided us with information which is not only crucial to be aware of, but more importantly, for us to learn from the global view and the day-to-day challenges to be faced in an attempt to meet and address these challenges. ACWW wishes you well with your endeavors and your further engagements in culture and education as important elements of relations between countries. Thank you for being available a little later to address questions later in the session. Thanks again. Moving on, I would now like to introduce you to our next speaker. Mrs. Marie Kenny is ACWW's United Nations Committee Chairman and was elected in 2019. She has dedicated a large portion of her life to supporting, advocating, and raising funds for health, education, and social initiatives for women. Marie is a lifetime member of the Women's Institute and has been elected as the local and provincial president. She also served as national president of the Federation Women's Institute of Canada. In 2017, Marie was awarded the Adelaide Hunter Hoodless Canadian Women of the Year Award. Marie has led several humanitarian relief efforts to regions throughout North and South America and Africa. Marie received the Senate of Canada's 150th Anniversary Medal, awarded to Canadians actively involved in their communities who, through generosity, dedication, volunteerism, and hard work, make their hometowns, their communities, regions, provinces, or territories a better place to live. Marie has also received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Award Medal and the Governor General Sovereign's Medal for volunteerism. Mrs. Kennedy, the floor is yours to inform us on the links between local projects and international advocacy. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I have been very lucky to work extensively in my own local community, helping women through my lifelong involvement with the Women's Institute and my commitment to education and social investment in young women. I live on Prince Edward Island in the northeast of Canada with a population of around 160,000 people, the majority of whom live lives focused on agriculture, farming, fisheries, tourism, and renewable energy. I've spent an extensive amount of time leading development and humanitarian missions to Guatemala, Bolivia, Kenya along the Somali border, and into the United States of America in response to climate-related disasters. At every stage, it has been very clear that the only path to success is collaborative empowerment. Western and North American involvement without local input, ownership, and leadership is doomed to repetitive, costly, and insensitive failure. We need those local voices and their experience to be heard and to be implemented in the design of international development work. ACWW has spent more than 90 years dedicated to amplifying the voices of rural women and ensuring their representation at the international level. For the past 42 years, we have funded small-scale, women-led development projects in partnership with local women in developing countries. Over these years, we have used the conversations and the lessons learned to improve our process and to feed into international processes. It was this experience which allowed ACWW to give direct input into the creation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the Millennium Development Goals, and the present Sustainable Development Goals. We bring this experience forward in testimony to CEDA and to the high-level political forum on sustainable development. I believe that civil society organizations like ACWW provides the crucial link between grassroots, lived experience, governments, and international opportunities for action. Our obligation as an organization to our membership includes helping build their own understanding of world events, while listening to their input on their values and what is important to them. We must challenge ignorance and intolerance and ensure that we are providing women in rural communities with good quality, accurate information, which will help them engage with their own local and national mechanisms. Rural women are ready to voice their opinions, and ACWW's role is to see that they have the platform to act and influence the world around them. One real example of the collaborative work we are doing relates to the eradication of canine rabies. In 1920, ACWW members voted adopting a policy resolution calling for action to eradicate canine medicated rabies. This translated into a resolution, translated into a partnership with the Global Alliance for Rabies Control and the rolling out of a free training program of rabies awareness and community education. As well as offering this to all ACWW members, those organizations who receive development project funding from ACWW are included in the program, and indeed they are encouraged to take part in the training. As well as strengthening their communities, this also elevates the standing of these women in their own localities as they become certified experts on community response to rabies. This initiative came from a local problem experienced by our members, and it led to their colleagues in more than 80 countries voting to adopt a new policy for the organization. The action that follows this all stems from that local voice, and this is the critical input that is needed. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants, the 2030 Agenda, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, and indeed, the agreed conclusions of many of the sessions of the Commission on the Status of Women are highlighting the need for the voices of rural women to be heard and their experiences to be brought to the forefront in response to climate change, representation at decision-making, and the host of other issues. We know that the challenges facing rural women in countries around the world is not unique, but indeed connect these communities in a network of injustice. Last year, the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration was largely overlooked because of the impact of COVID-19. Now, while the response to a global pandemic must be priority, it is extremely disheartening to see that few of the platform of action goals have been met. Women who took a stand, worked diligently to establish actionable goals, are disappointed, to say the very least. These women have seen the MDGs crumble, and they are looking at the SDGs with a sense of doom. This needs to change. We have the opportunity in 2021 to take hold of our futures and to raise our voices until they cannot be dismissed. As I mentioned earlier, in my experience, collaborative action is the empowerment and is the only way to accomplish our goals. In this virtual room, there are representatives from so many different organizations and many different countries. We hold within our networks, our collective experiences, and our combined efforts, the opportunity to actually change the world for the better. Indeed, as my previous speaker has mentioned, we are at a tipping point. So I challenge you today, leaving this meeting, consider how your organization might work with ACWW to accomplish our mutual aims. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kenny, for your input and for so clearly articulating the role played by ACWW and other civil society organizations in advocating for their grassroots constituents globally. Your personal experience as a representative of the Canadian government at CSW, as a delegate acting on behalf of an NGO, and in the field, position you with a unique contribution to bring to the table, and we are grateful for you doing so today. I know that you will be happy to take questions later in the session, and I thank you for that as well. The next speaker will be addressing the topic, working with governments and local success stories. And therefore, addressing this event from New Zealand is Jill Naylor, the National President of Rural Women New Zealand, a trustee on the Heartland Otago Southland Life Education Trust, and has served on the local Plunkett community along with many school, sports, and other community groups. She spent her childhood on a sheep and a beef farm in the south of the South Island, and then joined her husband's family, farming a 300-hectare irrigated sheep, beef, and grain property in central Otago. Jill has a passion for farming and life in rural communities, which has continued throughout her life, keeping her focused on seeing the community working together to empower all those who live there. A member of Associated Country Women of the World, Rural Women New Zealand is a charitable organization which has worked on strengthening, supporting, and connecting people and communities in rural New Zealand for nearly 100 years. Jill is proud to lead the organization's strong voice on issues that affect rural communities, especially those affecting women, children, and families, which range from the lack of equitable access to education, to health services, internet and cellular connectivity, to increasing the number of women in leadership and decision-making roles. Offering solutions to these challenges empowers rural women and ultimately ensures viable, vibrant rural communities in New Zealand. Mrs. Naylor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jill Naylor, ahau. Greetings to you all, I'm Jill Naylor. Rural Women New Zealand is a charitable organisation that has been strengthening, supporting and connecting rural people and communities since 1925. Our work involves community service at a local level, supporting and celebrating rural business women as well as our own achievements, developing policy which offers solutions to challenges which affect rural people and communities, and influencing decision makers to ensure the best outcomes for rural women and their children. This goes beyond farming. Our rural communities in New Zealand include small villages, rural service towns, and smaller regional centres, as well as our food and fibre producing farmers, the agribusiness sector that supports these growers, and other small and medium businesses and services in local towns, all of which support or contribute to the economic and social well-being of rural communities. We take pride in what we do and are always striving to do better as the political, social and economic environment evolves. Sometimes it's the same old things, from inequality to access to services between urban and rural areas, to issues around isolation and remoteness. And sometimes it's the new things, such as the newest technology not reaching everyone. Any or all of these issues can adversely affect our rural communities and therefore disadvantage those conducting their daily lives in those communities. We are constantly articulating the challenges and solutions of life in rural New Zealand to the predominantly city-based decision makers, many of whom are men. Rural Women New Zealand has a very good relationship with the New Zealand Parliament, with the result being that many government departments and members of Parliament come to us to seek our thought on policies as they are being developed. Ministers are keen to meet with us, and the Prime Minister supports us in the events that we organise when she can. We are mentioned in speeches in the House of Parliament, and we have effected change in legislation which empower rural communities. This relationship comes from a coordinated effort at all levels. In policy development, Rural Women New Zealand was involved in the initial workshops held by this government in their previous parliamentary term to determine guidelines for rural proofing of policy development and service delivery planning. These guidelines were adopted and the Minister advised all of his colleagues that they existed. Once they were launched, we followed up with a letter to all government ministers and chief executives of government agencies, encouraging them to use the rural proofing guidelines in any policy work development and service delivery planning. With any luck, there may be a website coming up that indicates what the rural proofing guidelines are. Part of the rural proofing guidelines and a messaging around them includes the fact that the needs and experiences of rural communities must be considered at the beginning of policy development, hence the early contact from government departments. This early intervention, coupled with various meetings with ministers and members of Parliament, along with quality submissions which build credibility at select committee level and gentle nudging of the issues through press releases, all form the strategy to build a constructive relationship with the government. The key to our success is the multi-level work. One piece of it can't work without the other. At this point, I would like to say a little bit about how our Parliament and government works. Yes, our democracy uses the Westminster system. However, we have some nuances which make it very accessible. We are unicameral in that we have one level of Parliament made up of members from different political parties elected under a mixed member proportional representation system. Parliament votes on legislation and as a part of the deliberations has a select committee system organised in portfolios with members of Parliament from all political parties allocated each. The select committees take an in-depth look at legislation between its first and second reading by including the view of the general public through written and oral submissions, and after discussion provides a report to the House by which I mean the House of Parliament. Government refers to the ruling party. They can rule alone if they have enough voices and are therefore elected, or in coalition, as they did in the previous parliamentary term, which was from 2017 to 2020. Whilst we work with members of Parliament who aren't necessarily part of the government, the decisions made by Parliament rely on a majority vote. We therefore emphasise our work on where we might influence the most change. The government are advised by their officials, and so we work with both government agencies and government ministers in the first instance. We have had some notable successes with this strategy, and one which springs to mind is the firearms legislation in the wake of the tragedy in Christchurch 2 years ago, the mosque shooting, where 51 people were tragically murdered. The government took swift action and presented its first tranche of changes in legislation to make certain firearms illegal, tighten up licensing, and to ensure that New Zealand would be safe from the. Our members were very quick to respond to our survey. We knew the results would be wanted by the Select Committee, so we approached them and asked to be included in the list of stakeholders giving oral submissions. We arrived at the appointed time the next day to tell our story and why we supported the move to change the legislation. Our point of difference was that we were bringing a rural perspective from women, and as a result, parts of the legislation were changed. We were quoted by news media across the country and even by the Minister of Police in the House. Additionally, as a result of our oral submission, we were invited with the policy teams at New Zealand Police to discuss ongoing changes to legislation. Other successes are in legislation to improve family trust law, farm debt mediation, and a code around the use of New Zealand's emergency call number, which is 111. The reality is that our members are feeling heard, and they are quite literally heard in the House. Our public policy remits at our annual general meetings have increased, and so have the numbers of members responding to our research surveys and requests for experiences to share. I wonder whether some of this is because our members are seeing an outcome. Changes in legislation and interest from members in Parliament in who we are and what we do at local, regional, and national level. The other reality is that COVID presented us with an opportunity to have online policy discussions with our members so that we could carry on our influential discussions with Parliament and government. Our face-to-face policy summit was a recent addition to the annual general meetings held in our capital city, Wellington. And in 2020, due to COVID, with technology, these became our Policy Summit webinar series. We held the first 3 of these towards the end of 2020. The first discussed maternal health, in particular, the challenges facing rural midwives. The second was titled Why Vote? Our general election was imminent at that time, so we explored the importance of women being able to exercise their right to vote, and honoured Suffrage Day, which is when New Zealand celebrates the day that we were the first sovereign nation in the world to grant all women the right to vote. The third webinar in the series was Women in Leadership, tips and strategies from local and international women in leadership. Our first webinar for 2021 related to a remit from members at last November's annual general meeting on increasing awareness of ovarian cancer. Our profile is such that panelists for our Policy Summit webinar series included those with lived experience and local, national, and international experts. The series really is grassroots to global. Our members are seeing the reality of our work because we communicate well, both internally and externally. We share what we are doing through member advisories, e-newsletters, and press releases. Our website reflects who we are and what we do, and we have made it easy to find information there. The reality of the impact on our members has also been in our increasing profile. Our board are in the news for their policy work, and the reality is that this increases our profile. It does mean more work, as both staff and board are contacted for opinions, asked for support with an issue, or ideas are found for further research. Excuse me. Our website should pop up on the chat box. Now, the most important reality from our success is that rural communities are becoming better places to live, work, and play for women and children. The articulation of our message is clear and succinct. We include facts laced with emotion. Our stories are shared at all levels. This ensures our position resonates with many. Excuse me. Sorry. Our winning formula is based on evidence-based policy, a sense of reasonableness, a passion for and understanding of rural communities, and real-life stories from our members. Our aim is to clearly articulate, yet deliver with emotion and respect to all, from our conversations at local social gatherings to presentations at Parliament. Kia kaha, haere pai, kia ora. Stay strong, go well, and thank you. I'll now hand you back to Madam President.
Thank you, thank you. Jill, the way in which you are working collaboratively with members of Parliament seems to be contributing to your stories of success and the healthy working relationship coming from coordinated efforts at all levels. And ultimately, rural communities are becoming better places for women and children to live, work, and play. Thank you again. I wish to thank all panelists for their presentations today. I feel that we have some excellent inputs, and I know that we have some questions from the audience. I'd like to hand over at this stage to ACWW's Policy and Communications Manager, Mr. Nick Newland, who will moderate this questions and answer sessions, this panel then. So Nick, please, and there you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam World President, and thank you to all our panelists so far. We've had a couple of questions in already. Now, I'm very aware of the time. We have about 15 minutes left officially in this session, and NGO CSW very kindly grant us 10 minutes after that as leeway. But I would like to invite anyone who's interested to also join us tomorrow. We have 2 sessions billed as afternoon tea with the ACWW World President. We'll be putting the Zoom links for that in the chat shortly. So if there are more questions that we don't get to address today, we will certainly address those tomorrow and be happy to come back on those. So our first question, which comes from Liz in upstate New York. While the public policy and academic worlds have been talking about the importance of girls' education for decades, how do we address cultural and societal concerns in prioritizing girls' education over other work? I think perhaps if we could come to Irene first on that. How do we focus on education over work, and how do we make that work in our societies?
Okay, thank you, Nick. I think within the rural community now, they've seen the value of that for the girl child, especially with all what the United Nations has been doing, and the quality of family care given by children. We see that the girl child is more responsible within the family, and this has helped to improve on the education of the child. Here, back in Cameroon, they say if you educate a girl, you know that you have your life sustainability. So most families now tend to, educate their girl children. And we are now having some fears because the boys are being relegated, and this might, they're going to truancy and other things. So with this in mind, especially the caring attitude, the nurturing attitude, and all the qualities that the girl has, the family means much more to a girl child. And so the tendency is to get them more educated now. And so many more are going into education. And then we see the turnovers from educating a girl child within a family. The turnovers are numerous. We can't enumerate them now, but I think we all know what benefits it is educating a girl child.
Great, thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to come in on that from our panel before I take the second question? Great, Jill from Rural Women New Zealand.
Yes, thank you, Nick. I think part of the answer to this is to look at changing the leadership in education to those that understand. In the leadership stakes, many are men. Women are proportionately more teachers and not principals. And also at the decision-making level, to have more rural women in that mix would help getting the education messages out to our rural areas and our rural children.
Great, thank you, Jill. I'm going to move on to our second question. Annette in the UK, who is, I know, leaving the meeting shortly. She has in the chat put a long question referring back to her own experiences and also those of Irene and Hans in very different regions. And it actually ties in wonderfully with our first question and the answers we've already had. The summary is, it is men who have to change. And how do the panel suggest we do this? And I thought before I hand over to possibly the only other man on this call, I might take a stab at this one myself. I think one of the critical things that we have to identify is that, especially as more and more governments around the world decide to focus finance and especially overseas budgets on girls' education, which I think is wonderful and fully support, we also need to be aware that the existing educational processes need to be reformed. And I think there needs to be a focus and understanding of gender equality and tackling outdated patriarchal traditions. We need to have a gender lens in education, as we do in any other policy forum. There's a fantastic organization called Sticks and Stones in New Zealand, which was founded by a young nurse called Ashley Smith, who the ACWW delegation had the pleasure of meeting at CSW in 2018, when she attended alongside Rural Women New Zealand representatives as part of the official New Zealand delegation. And they are really focusing on not only the suffering of young women through bullying, but also addressing that with young men and bringing them on side and in educating them in responding and indeed stopping that at its source. So I just wanted to highlight that, but I'll hand over to Hans, if I may.
Yes, thank you, Nick. I saw the question, and it's the best way I can say that I've worked on it is just unstoppingly give the right example. And when I was consul in St. Petersburg and I was a deputy in Kiev, we had these women who spoke English and could do their job well. And in both places, I took the risk. Well, not actually a risk, but I said, well, I'm going to do loose management. You do the job. And then when you visit your Ukrainian or your Russian counterparts, they're nearly always men. And then say, well, Hans, what do you think of this and this? And then I turned to my colleagues, well, Vika, you tell him, or Sveta, you tell him. And first they were amazed. I said, yeah, but you're the consul or you're the deputy ambassador. And they said, yeah, well, that can be, but the one who really knows it is sitting next to me. And it helps. Second thing that helped, but that was unwillingly, is that I became a consul general in St. Petersburg in the year that we had tremendous trouble with the Russian government over this plane that was shot down over Ukraine. And every governor made it the sport to start yelling at me for 20 minutes in really bad Russian language. So I know a lot of slang at this moment. And one of them was so bad, the one in Pskov, he was yelling at me so bad that I thought he was talking to his driver. So I looked the other way around, and I saw his driver standing, but the driver said, "No, he's talking to you." So it's that shouting, that didn't end in a shouting match. So I just let him shout, and then said, "Well, there are pills for stress control, and otherwise you should talk to women because they're a lot calmer." And the nice thing then is that the women next to him said, "Listen, Andre, can't you behave like Hans? Because he's also a manager, and that is not a lot better than what you do." And that is something the ladies in the consulate general are telling others. The nice thing of work for Hans is, okay, he's a man, he behaves like a man, but at least he's polite and gives us a total chance to do our own work, and we can do it. What I really loved, that's the last example I give, is you have in St. Petersburg every 2 years you have Neva, a huge shipping exhibition. Well, if there's one sector male-dominated, macho-dominated, strongman-dominated, it's shipping. One of the best companies was a Dutch one run by a woman. Fabulous. All the Russians stuck there and saw a woman selling tugboats. Could you believe that? Now that works. It's these simple things that Russians say, good Lord, there's a woman selling tugboats. How can she know about horsepower, etc., and storms and Force 9? She knew everything. So it's, I think it's setting the examples, delivering role models. And one thing, and that's one thing I've really learned because I've done a lot of development cooperation, don't tell people how to behave. They know damn well what they need, but what they do need is role models. What they do need is examples. What they want to know is, are you there in the Netherlands, Hans, if we call you again and ask you to say the same thing?
Great, thank you. I'm not going to open that up to the panel any further, I'm afraid. I'm going to crack on because we have more questions, but thank you for that, Ambassador. We have a question from Ida Walker. I would like to hear which the characteristics, principles, and qualities you want to see in a world working, sorry, excuse me, my text has just disappeared, in a world working towards women in leadership and decision-making processes. I'm going to open that up, I think, to Marie for a brief response, and then probably go to Jill Naylor, if I may.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the question. I think the one of the things that we have to consider most is equality. Women been treated with respect and dignity and been able to be represent in decision making. Education, again, is a huge part of that. And as Irene has mentioned earlier, educating a woman is really educating a community. And if we want to see sustainable change, we have to allow women to have representation in decision making and allow that equality and respect, that in dignity to speak forth, so that all forms of gender can feel welcomed and can feel that their voice is important. The one thing about ACWW is we value every voice. We listen and then we learn from those voices. And I think that is something that is important globally for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. And Jill, it's suddenly nighttime by the looks of it, where you are, but if we can hand over to you. Okay, we may have had a small technical issue with Jill, so I'm going to get her to come back in a moment if she reappears. I've got, we had a question from Svetlana in the Ukraine, asking how important is cross-sectoral partnership for women leaders in rural areas? And I'm actually going to not get that one answered straight away because I know that Mogdi has some commentary on that in her remarks. So I will come back to that one if I may. Then I have a fantastic question here. Bear with me just a moment. Sorry, I'm trying to find the text. So a question, as more girls take up educational opportunities and move away from rural farming, what support is available to mothers and widows to ensure that they can continue their farming? Perhaps if I could start with Irene on that one.
Yeah, we have I said the women are organized in groups, and we have this women's group, Jangi group. So, and they are paid workers. We have these migrant farmers who leave other villages and come to, other rural communities, which they think are much better. So that is one of the ways in which we realize that there is continuity, because it's some labor force that they offer and they're paid for it. That's how it operates here. The women are paid for the work they do. And I think another way would be the government's incentives on agriculture. If the government could make agriculture more recognized, these women will not abandon the farms. The youths, most of the youths who don't have anything to do, they move from the rural communities to the urban areas because they are in need of better life. But if the government makes it possible that their incentives and agriculture is now pushed forward, they're organized, agriculture is well organized, as the whole structure is organized, I think it will keep them within the rural community and will not really be having much of a problem.
Thank you, Irene. I must say, one of the most striking things for me today, in 2 consecutive meetings at the Commission on the Status of Women, these parallel events, we've had leaders from rural communities who have been totally unable to fully participate in meetings because their internet has failed. So this afternoon, our own world president, Mogdi de Kock, had a power cut, which took her out of a meeting she was due to be speaking in. And indeed, I'm afraid we have lost temporarily Jill Naylor from Rural Women New Zealand, who has also just had a power cut and so has been cut out of the meeting. I'm actually going to stop with the questions and answers there just because of time. However, Svetlana, Megan, Bozina, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. I have made a note of your questions and your contact and your names. And I will put those questions to our panelists and ask them to come back to me over the next few days, if I may. And then I'll respond to you through the CSW Pathable platform. So we do get answers to you. And I hope that will be of use to you. Thank you all to our panelists for answering those questions. And I'll hand back to the World President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. I think that is a very good idea to handle the questions as you have suggested now. Thank you to everyone who presented a question and to our panelists for their considerate responses. Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for moderating this session. The consistent message that I have heard from all our speakers today is the critical importance of civil society space in our nations, in our local communities, and of course, at the international level. Our collaborative methods allow us to build on what has already been achieved and give us a mechanism to address the backward motion we have all felt in recent years. Well, Jill, perhaps you can still hear me. I think we are all grateful for how strong Rural Women New Zealand's relationship is with your government. And this has certainly shone through in your work and your speech today. And Nick mentioned it, that ACWW has had the opportunity to work with you on this in responding to New Zealand's voluntary national review at the high-level political forum on sustainable development in 2019 and witness firsthand how responsive your government was. Irene, it is clear that the challenges facing rural women on a daily basis in Cameroon and across much of East Africa are significant. I have long admired your personal work with Women's Enterprise and Empowerment Network and have seen the impact of your leadership, and it has also in your community. I also think we can draw inspiration from the total commitment to education and participation that you and your colleagues display on a daily basis. This is our next step, this empowerment of women most in need on the journey to truly global citizenship. Ambassador, we are grateful for your attendance and your input. And I know your experience in the field and from dealing with the rebuilding of civil society in post-conflict and fragile countries provides a unique insight. Your commitment to civil society and its organizations is clear in both your attendance here today and your work at UNESCO. To have the voice of a state party join us in calling for the safeguarding of civil society space and participating at CSW outside of the UN is a wonderful asset. Marie, like our other panelists, your experience of local, national, and international processes is strengthened by your work in the field. The call for local involvement in the creation of development programs, responses to climate change and disaster, and indeed the ownership of the sustainable development goals is one close to my own heart. Joining the dots between the smallest village and the largest governments is critical if we are to achieve SDG 4.7 and take that step closer to genuinely sustainable success. Education, as we know, is the solution to so many varied problems, and recognizing the role of rural women in these solutions can't be more important. I'd now like to invite each panelist to offer 1-minute closing remarks, if you feel like doing that. And let us start with Irene, please. Irene Chincheng.
Yeah, what I'll say is this an opportunity which I'm so grateful for. I think that I would like to add the voices of our women in Africa to the UN to be more focused on the grassroots, because we realize that the UN is doing a lot, but it stays up within the higher realms of the government. Projects that are meant for the rural women, we don't really see the success because evaluation and monitoring is done within a level that you can't even understand. And when you come back to the grassroots, you don't see anything. So I'll be very grateful with what we are coming now to get our voices heard. We will be grateful if the UN can be more on the ground, so as to make sure that these women's projects really touch the grassroots women, touch the rural women, touch the community women in education, in project monitoring, whatever projects they are doing. I think it's best for us. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you very much, Irene. And Your Excellency, Mr. Hans Wesseling, is there something you would like to add? Another minute?
I'll take less than a minute to give you a bit more time. Yes, once we have been, a few years ago, we were talking about the wide European space from Lisbon to Vladivostok. It seems that under current circumstances, that's got a bit more difficult than we had expected 20 years ago. The difficulty is that we have not included women in that process. And as the women, certainly in Europe, and most certainly in Eastern Europe, are the ones that are the fearless drivers of transition and change for the good, I think we will never reach the Lisbon-Vladivostok ideal if we do not make sure that the women contribute to that in the same amount as men. That's what we need, gender equality, to get the big European space we all long for. Thank you very much, Maggie.
Thank you. Thank you for this closing remark. And Mrs. Marie Kenny, 1 minute for you for a closing remark, please.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say it's been a privilege to share with you today and to participate in this virtual panel with such engaging and inspiring speakers. And thank you to those who asked questions. Let us keep the conversation going, please. ACWW does value your voice. We exist to amplify those collective voices, knowing the strong representation can make a difference to achieve sustainable actions. Again, I encourage you, let us work collaboratively on our mutual aims and to change the world, achieve a better future for all. For truly, we are stronger when we work together. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. I believe that while we are all missing the opportunity to be sat together in New York this week and next, sharing our experiences face to face or rekindling friendships from across the globe, we must also be grateful for the chance to share these experiences with the widest audience in the history of the Commission on the Status of Women. Do you know more than 25,000 women, advocates, activists, and allies of all ages have come together to say our voices must be heard. We are proud to be hosting one element of this process and grateful that our panelists and each of you have taken the time to join us today. Global citizenship is, as I earlier said, our pathway to peace. To each of the panelists, I can truly say that we are strengthened in our journey going forward by your input, and I know that our audience will agree that this forum for sharing good practice, identifying the challenges faced, and openly discussing what stands before us gives us all new opportunities for growth and success. So, thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to connecting with you all in person in the near future.